The hegemony consul sat on the balcony of his ebony spaceship and played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor on the ancient but well-maintained Steinway, while great green saurian things surged and bellowed in the swamps below. A thunderstorm was brewing to the north. Bruised black clouds silhouetted a forest of giant gymnosperms, while stratocumulus towered 9 kilometers high in a violent sky. Lightning rippled along the horizon. Closer to the ship, occasional vague, reptilian shapes would blunder into the interdiction field, cry out, and then crash away through indigo mists. The consul concentrated on a difficult section of the prelude and ignored the approach of storm and nightfall. The fat line receiver chimed in. The consul stopped, fingers hovering above the keyboard, and listened. Thunder rumbled in the heavy air. From the direction of the gymnosperm's forest there came a mournful ululation of a carrion breed pack. Somewhere in the darkness below, a small-brained beast trumpeted its answering challenge and fell quiet. The interdiction field added its sonic undertones to the sudden silence. The fat line chimed again. "Damn," said the consul, and went to answer it. While the computer took a few seconds to convert and decode the burst of decaying tachyons, the consul poured himself a glass of scotch. He settled into the cushions of the projection pit just as the disk key blinked green. "Play," he said. "You have been chosen to return to Hyperion," came a woman's husky voice. Full visuals had not yet formed. The air remained empty except for the pulse of a transmission codes, which told the consul that his fat line squirt had originated on the hegemony administrative world of Tau Ceti Center. The consul did not need the transmission coordinates to know this. The aged but still beautiful voice of Mina Gladstone was unmistakable. "You have been chosen to return to Hyperion as a member of the Shrike Pilgrimage," continued the voice. "The hell you say?" thought the consul as he rose to leave the pit. "You and 6 others have been selected by the Church of the Shrike and confirmed in the All-Thing," said Mina Gladstone. "It is in the interest of the hegemony that you accept." The consul stood motionless in the pit, his back to the flickering transmission codes. Without turning, he raised his glass and drained the last of the scotch. "The situation is very confused," said Mina Gladstone. Her voice was weary. "The consulate and Home Rule Council fat-lined us 3 standard weeks ago with the news that the time tombs showed signs of opening. The anti-entropic fields around them were expanding rapidly, and the Shrike has begun ranging as far south as the Bridle Range." The consul turned and dropped into the cushions. A hollow had formed of Mina Gladstone's ancient face. Her eyes looked as tired as her voice sounded. "A forced space task force was immediately dispatched from Parvati to evacuate the hegemony citizens on Hyperion before the time tombs open. Their time debt will be a little more than 3 Hyperion years." Mina Gladstone paused. The consul thought he had never seen the Senate CEO look so grim. "We do not know if these evacuation fleets will arrive in time," she said. "But the situation is even more complicated. An ouster migration cluster of at least 4,000 units has been detected approaching from the Hyperion system. Our evacuation task force should arrive only a short while before the ousters." The consul understood Gladstone's hesitation. An ouster migration cluster might consist of ships ranging in size from single-person ram scouts to can cities and comet forts holding tens of thousands of interstellar barbarians. That, my friends, is a really terrible reading of the excellent opening to Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This book is a Hugo Award-winning novel, as it so proudly tells you on the front, and there's good reason for that. It was unlike any other book I think I have ever read in my life. There were points in time in this book where I let out cries of pleasure, thinking that parts of this were tailored specifically for me. See, there's echoes of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales woven throughout. There are battles being replayed from medieval history. There's poetry of John Keats, and so much more. And to say that this is one of the best books that I've read this year might be an understatement. This might be the best book I've read this year. And that is to say all of that in spite of the disappointment of any lack of resolution at the end of this book. So let's talk a little bit about Hyperion. It is set up in a way where there are these pilgrims on their pilgrimage to Hyperion. And you heard some of that message at the beginning that the time tombs are opening on Hyperion. The Shrike has gotten loose and is starting to roam around on Hyperion. They're starting to evacuate the planet, and they're going to send some pilgrims. So they are sending 7 pilgrims on the way to Hyperion. And these 7 pilgrims in the ship on the way decide that to pass some of the time, they should tell their stories. To maybe figure out why each of these very unique individuals was chosen to go to Hyperion. And there are threads that are common to all of them that you will find across the stories. Some a little looser than others. And these stories take up the bulk of this book. You will get the stories of the travelers in here. And in between each of these traveler stories, these stories range from 50 to 80, 90 pages in length. And this is a book that is just under 500 pages long. So you're going to have some little interludes in between where there's some story progress going forward, but the vast majority of that story progress is travel, which is disheartening a little bit. I would have expected a Hugo Award-winning novel to wrap up in a way where you could say, okay, I've read this, I don't need to move on. But it does the frustrating thing of, I've read this, now I need to move on because I need to know what happens next. And that is the worst kind of cliffhanger at the time when it's being released. Thankfully, I'm reading this at a time where the entire Hyperion Cantos is available. I think I'd be extremely frustrated if I was reading it right after it was released. As good as this was, I would be very, very dissatisfied with that ending. But it was enjoyable getting to know each of these travelers, and that's where it really shines, is in how different and unique each of those tales are. Much like the Canterbury Tales, if you have read that by Geoffrey Chaucer. If you haven't, join me in December when we're going to be doing just that. But that's the start of the show, is seeing how each of these people have gotten to this point where they're at, and the tales that they tell. And they're so radically different from each other. You've got one that has strong religious undertones. You've got one that feels like it is a militaristic sci-fi where it's lots and lots of battles. You've got one that's like a detective short story that's in there. And that's not all of them. That's just 3 of the 7 pilgrims and the stories that are told. And they're wonderful. There's a poet, an actual poet in here that is writing poetry. And he's kind of the abrasive one, much to my joy. He's kind of the jerk of the group, the one that gets on people's nerves. But his story is absolutely fascinating. And the Shrike, in case you are curious, is this nice little intimidating looking thing of thorns and armor, and he's the big problem that is happening because of these time tombs opening. But how he's causing problems, how he's going to be dealt with, we don't know how he's going to be dealt with, but what's happened with him and all of that, you'll have to read in here to find out. This is a fantastic book. I'm excited to continue reading the series. I'm excited to reread this at some point in time in the probably nearish future, like not this year, probably not next year, but shortly after that. I'd like to probably read the Hyperion Cantos and then go back to this one, having that fuller understanding and just enjoy the richness of the storytelling that's in here. I absolutely love. Can't talk. I absolutely loved this book. Um, Again, it felt like parts of this were written just for me. It was giving call outs to things that I love, that I enjoy. There were moments where I was tempted to squeal in delight because it's like, okay, this is my kind of stuff. And it's all set in this backdrop of this futuristic sci-fi world of this journey to Hyperion, this pilgrimage, and all of the things that are going on. And it's all so interesting, so fascinating. Um, Apart from the conclusion, my other biggest complaint in the middle of it was the length of the chapters. See, each chapter has a person's story plus interlude before it gets to the next chapter. So these chapters are long. And so if you want a book that has natural good breaking points, this is not the book for you. If you are driven nuts by, oh gosh, I've got to read 87 more pages to get to the end of this chapter, I need to finish the chapter, you're going to hate this. But if you're willing to accept that the flow of it, the breaking of it is story to story, then you're going to absolutely enjoy this. It's like reading a bunch of different novellas contained in here with a backdrop of a story that connects it all together, that is going to be continued, which is I'm still frustrated about that. And I saw it coming. By the time I got within 30, 40 pages of the end, I'm like, there's no way this resolves in any way, shape, or form, because I'm still in the midst of the last story being told. And they're nowhere near any kind of a resolution, unless you think of a resolution as we've arrived to where we're going. And that's not a resolution based on what it's setting up. That is not a satisfying resolution. It'd be like Star Wars Return of the Jedi. It ends when they arrive at the Death Star 2 and arrive at deploying on Endor. It says, okay, we have reached here. We are ready to amass this great big battle. The end. To be continued. You wouldn't like that. You want to see what happens. You want to see how it ends. And I'm guessing that because the continuation is going to take so long, that's why it had to break into another book. I have a feeling by the time I read the entire series, I won't care as much about this ending being a non-ending, because I'll have been able to continue through and read the rest. So friends, if you haven't read Hyperion, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is fantastic. It is a literary science fiction, a historical science fiction. It is a militaristic science fiction. It is a detective crime science fiction, and so much more, all within that same book, and it is fantastic. There's a reason why it won the Hugo, and there's a reason why I'm going to be continuing very soon, as soon as I'm able to fit it into my reading, that I will be diving right into the Fall of Hyperion, because it is outstanding. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. My next video, if things go well, will be talking about 5 science fiction series that I need to start. I'm cutting it down to just 5, because otherwise I'd be rattling off about 500 of them. So, thank you for watching.